Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody. Thank you for tuning in to another Supatease video. And there are some big changes coming into the PvP season tomorrow. And I wanted to update my solo shuffle tier list now that we've had a week of a ton of hours logged of gameplay and observations of other top level players. And my analysis so far of the changes coming through to give you an idea of which specializations I think are likely going to be the most dominant now for PvP season 2 in the solo shuffle bracket. I'm going to do my best to break this down, ranged by ranged and melee by melee, even though it's kind of all over the place towards the bar. I wish this thing didn't reset, but sometimes it does. So we're going to do our best to break it down class by class, role by role, in order to give you guys the best possible results. So we've got God tier here, and this doesn't happen very often, but sometimes I do put a tier for God tier where certain specializations I think are just performing at a much higher level than even you would normally anticipate. Affliction Warlock, I'm going to be putting up onto S tier at the moment. I think that it is still as strong as it was basically in season 1. I think it can struggle with particularly some of the specs that I'm going to be putting up into God tier. And that's the main reason it's not God tier itself, is that it is susceptible to these specs above it. In terms of their performance, it struggles to get pressure against a lot of the classes up here, but overall it's still in a really good spot. I've had a lot of fun with it. It's still really strong moving into season 2. Now let's look at another Warlock spec. Demonology, though, on the other hand, I'm going to be slotting this into A tier. I think it's actually still reasonably strong. I've seen a lot of Shadow play, Warlock Shadow Priest on the ladder, and I think that's mostly because of Shadow Priest, which when we get to, I think you'll have an idea of what tier that's going into. But I think its burst damage is still a little bit low, and its damage is a little bit more difficult to ramp up. Affliction can just get a Haunt Shadow Bolt off and pretty much have enough execute power in that alone, and has a lot of instant damage on the move, whereas the pets can be easily countered. The advantage is that you do get a stun. So in Affliction needs to play with melee DPS that have stuns, and Demo can play with casters. So there's some pros and cons depending on your setups, but I think the melee AF comps are generally better than the Demo double caster comps at the moment. So I think it's the main reason that, when you come into shuffle, you can't guarantee what classes you're going to get, and melee are generally more popular. So Demo melee is generally weaker than Affliction melee, so it's probably going to be a bit harder for you. So I think A tier is probably a more reasonable spot. Destruction Warlock is doing really well. I do kind of want to put Destruction Warlock on S tier at the moment. It is doing really well. It's got a tremendous amount of burst damage. It's just really solid spot. It's probably still a bit fragile to a lot of the melee DPS specs in the game. And again, the main reason I'm not putting it up on the God tier for that reason. But it's still a really strong specialization. Now, Boomkin. I think Boomkin is honestly A tier. It feels surprisingly better than last season, which I was surprised. Because they didn't buff its defense at all, so it's weird to log on. I think mostly it's just our stats increasing, so Cyclone isn't as painfully slow. So even though Cyclone's lasting 1 second shorter duration this season, the fact that you can actually finish the cast and actually get through interrupts is making it a lot more of a competitive option in the current meta. So yeah, definitely Boomkin is an A tier. Survivability is where it's mostly being held back, but I've been actually having a lot more fun with it. I was thinking about giving up on it after season 1, but I might actually stick it through after the changes for it that we've seen so far. Elemental is a bit of a tough one. A lot of people are thinking like the lightning build could end up being really good. Problem is that I think it's comp dependent. So if you got double caster and you're playing with something like a Boomkin or a Destro that's going to take aggro basically, and you can free cast, that lightning build is probably actually better. The Tempest build, especially with the buffs coming in. But if you don't have a caster to soak aggro and you're getting trained, I think it's probably going to fall a bit flat in viability. But with the sustained buffs overall, I feel like this one's a harder one to rank, but I feel like it can't fall any lower than A. It's probably higher than A, but I don't think it can fall any lower than A with the changes that are coming through for it. Now, Arcane Mage, this is a tough one because I think Arcane Mage is actually super sleeper. As far as viability, there's a lot of DPS specs that are viable right now. Like you can have a lot of fun playing pretty much almost anything in the game. So Arcane is a really hard one. I want to put it on S, but I'm trying to also reserve myself a bit. A spec we actually don't see a lot of is Frost Mage. I'm really surprised we don't see it. Like I don't see it almost at all anymore. It's like completely disappeared. I don't know if Mage in general is just because Hunter is so popular that it's kind of just, we don't see it. All the mages rerolled Hunter or something. Maybe that's what's going on, because I can't even really rank Frost because I almost never see it. I'm actually going to put Frost here onto A tier, and we're going through the Mage specs here a little bit separately. But I think Mage is definitely still A at least. It could be higher, but I almost never see it. So again, much like Ellie, it's like this is like a minimum ranking for it. Definitely could be performing higher than this. But with Hunters and Feral Druids, I could see why Mage would be struggling, and especially if Ellie gets juiced up at all. Those 3 specs in general, or roles in general, just end up making Mage life a living hell, especially in Shuffle. Fire is getting nerfed. I don't know. People keep ranking it really high, but I swear it's not that good. I'm putting in Solo Shuffle. In Solo Shuffle, I think Mage in general is weaker in Solo Shuffle. On top of that, with the nerfs that came through, I'm putting Fire on B tier. You Fire Mages that seem to think that it's ungodly right now, please let me know in the comments down below if this seems totally off base with this one. Because again, I feel like I rarely see Mages at the moment. Everybody's just playing Hunter and Warlock. But I don't know why Fire would be even equal to Frost. I feel like they're just very similar, except Frost has snares and is slightly more durable. And that's like the main trade-off between them. But Arcane, though, I definitely know could be here, could be here. This spec is really good. And remember, I think this tier is like left to right. So like we'll put all these guys in here. Left to right means I think this is better than Destro. I think Destro is better than that. I think this is better than this. So there's up and down and there's left to right. Arcane, I think, is sleeper. I'm going to put it a little bit higher just because of how sleeper I think it is. BM Hunter was definitely, I think, the most slept on spec. I know everybody was like, oh my God, I got nerfed again. We're going to play Marksman. But after playing with a BM Hunter and seeing the difference between them, playing with Marksman and BM directly, BM Hunter's damage is just ungodly. It's just so much sustained damage. And when we get more set bonuses, oh my God. I think BM in Solo Shuffle, I think the trade-off is that Marksman's better in Battlegrounds, but in arena environments, especially with faster dampening, BM Hunter just absolutely chews people apart. It's just really good. Marksmanship Hunter, on the other hand, I'm going to be putting into S tier. I think it's probably better than Destro, probably better than Arcane, but maybe worse than Affliction, because it does have some limitations. I do think if you get like multiple plate melee DPS, it can be more difficult. And with the nerfs, actually, it might be a little bit lower. The nerfs aren't hitting Marksman as hard as something like Survival, but I think it could honestly maybe be a bit lower. I think here is maybe a safer spot to put it, but it could definitely fall from that spot. Devastation Evoker, really good beginner spec to pick up. I still think it's really good. Even though it's not as popular as other specs, does an insane amount of damage. Every single time I see a Devastation Evoker, doing an insane amount of damage. So I think like easily it's up here in the S tier category. Really straightforward, one button class. I don't know why more people aren't playing it. It is really good. It is really good. And then I think we have AUG, right? This is the last range DPS here for range DPS. AUG is still really good. I actually think. Do I think it's worse than Fire? There's no way. I'm going to put it here on B tier because I don't think it's worse than Fire, but it's definitely a lot better than it has been. I think the range DPS balance in general is probably the closest that we've seen as far as determining, like, I think this is the best or that's the best or this is the best or whatever. You know, it's getting actually really close as far as competitive viability. And I think if you ask almost anybody about their tier list, every tier list is going to have variance, which is honestly good. I think that the game is balanced when no one's tier list is the same. Then you know the game is actually getting balanced. But let's talk about melee DPS now. Arms Warrior, I don't think is that strong. I'm gonna put it on a B tier for Solo Shuffle. I think Fury Warrior is much better now than Arms Warrior. It's the same limitations, just mobility, survivability, those areas where you're getting kited a lot. Hunter's really popular. It's hard to connect on certain targets because of that and the nerfs that you got. So I'm going to put you a little bit lower. But Fury Warrior, though, I do think is still really good. Do I think it's S tier or A tier? I don't want to put like everything on S tier, but it's so hard not to because I swear a lot of things are good. I'm going to put it up here on the S tier for now, and then maybe as we go through the other melee DPS, we'll kind of filter that out and see how good it is or isn't good it is. Asa Rogue is super sleeper good. Asa Rogue is really good. Where do I want to put Asa Rogue? Asa Rogue is really good, really popular. Do I want to say it's godlike? I kind of want to. I feel like it's honestly like one of the most sleeper specs in the game. I think we're going to have to move Warrior down. I'm just looking at these other deep melee DPS, and I'm like, there's no way that we're not moving Fury Warrior down after seeing some of these other classes. Like, I kind of want to put Feral Druid here and God as well. I just think it just, on second Incarn, it's almost a free win every time. It's really strong. high mobility. Asa Rogue, we'll put on S tier, but I also want to put it on God tier. I just want to put everything on God tier, I swear, because everything's so insane. Enhance, on the other hand, I don't think is that remarkable. I think same issue, it's just mobility. It's going to have a hard time getting uptime. Yeah, it's the same issue. Although the Primordial Storm build does a lot of damage. I say Primordial Storm because Primordial Wave converts into Primordial Storm now. And it can do a lot of burst, but super keybind dense. I wish that they could do a little bit of like trimming down on its overall ability count. Shaman in general, mostly Resto and Enhance, but I think it's tough to actually connect a lot of the time. So I think it's probably one of the worst options that you could do, but it's not unviable. I think unviable is like your D tier. This is like very small. Although it looks like a large gap between these, I think it's very close as far as balance. Outlaw Rogue, I don't think is as good as it was before for some reason. Maybe that's just because I'm not fighting literally the AWC champion rogues in all of my lobbies like I did at the end of the season versus now at the beginning of the season. I think its damage is not as high. It feels like its damage has somehow gone down. And it's actually a viable target for a lot of classes because damage is so high on some specs. Now maybe that changes with the nerfs that they've done to some of the burst abilities and combos in the game. But I'm gonna put it like here, maybe. I think it's better than Fury. Maybe it's close. I'm gonna put it on A tier for solo shuffle. I think in the hands of the best player, it's possible that it is higher than this. But I don't know. Its damage feels a lot lower. It feels a lot lower this patch than the last patch, so I don't really want to put it much higher than that. Now Survival Hunter, I think is going to have a bit of a rough run. I kind of want to put you down here. Maybe not though. I think the 4% overall damage buff probably still holds you in a decent level. These melee generally have all of the same issues. They're just very exposed melee with kind of limited mobility, and they're more easily controlled than a lot of the other melee. And I think that's the main thing holding them back compared to the other melee DPS. And then with the nerfs, obviously the one-shot, you don't one-shot anymore, but that's the main problem with them down here. What do we have? Demon Hunter. Oh, this is a hard one. Because I actually think Demon Hunter is really good. Super sleeper. Demon Hunter is sleeper. I'm going to put Demon Hunter on S tier. Maybe we come back and regret that, but I think Demon Hunter is really good at the moment. It's just high damage output, high sustain, a lot of defensive cooldowns to rotate through. I think after they've nerfed a lot of these one-shot builds that can kind of just clip you and one-shot you before you realize what's happening, it's going to feel likely even stronger as a result of that. Frosty K in Shuffle, I still think it's good. I still think it's much better than Unholy. It's kind of sad that they turned you back into the Feast Famine spec that they tried to change you out of. Like for the last year, they've been making tuning changes to make you have more sustained damage, and then in this patch they introduced a cooldown for PvP that you just press that, and if you can connect to something, you're going to kill it instantly. And if you can't, then you're running around a circle until you have it again. So it's a little bit disappointing in that sense. But I think it's, as far as competitive viability, it's definitely still a strong option. I think I'm going to put somewhere in A tier. This is probably one of the harder ones to filter, is in between the A tier bracket. Unholy DK, on the other hand, I do think is going to struggle. This feels like its damage is a little low. I've keyed into it a couple times. Seems like some guys are able to make it work, but it feels like it's probably like close to the weakest melee, maybe the weakest melee. So I'm going to put it here. It's either here or here, right? Like I've seen the best players being able to make it work, but I think it's probably a little bit lower than that. And then Subtlety Rogue, I don't know. Subtlety Rogue is like, this is the crazy one. Like they're completely gutting your one shot. They took your duel away. This could end up just being an arms warrior that has cheap shots every 20 seconds. And if that's the case, it can be crazy good. But if the numbers aren't hit right on it, then I think it is going to be weaker. I think its damage is going to be more predictable. So I'm going to put it a little bit lower. I'm going to put it on B tier for now. It could be the best, could be the worst of it. I don't know, somewhere in here. I think it's probably better than Survival Hunter, at least. Maybe better than Arms Warrior. I'll leave Arms Warrior as the top in the B bracket, but this one's hit or miss. This one could be completely obscene or just totally useless. I think it's a very wild card one to go for. And then Ret Paladin, the buffs to it is overall it's like about an 8 to 10% damage increase. Still think you're really good in Shuffle. Spam Repentance is really strong. You still have a lot of good cooldowns. Team Utility. The overall damage was definitely like one of your more weaker points, but I think you were still really good. So I have a hard time not putting you like at least here onto A tier, if not possibly S tier. I do think like some lobbies can be hard, especially if you're getting like Ellie, Mage, Boomy or something like that. It's going to be hard. But a lot of the other ones where you get like a demon hunter or a warrior or feral druid or hunter, you can do really well in those situations. So a bit situational. And then windwalker. Okay, wait, I forgot this guy. This guy needs to go up here. Maybe feral druid comes down here. I don't know. I think windwalker is definitely in shuffle as god tier. The slicing winds build, the crackle build is just so much damage. It's really strong. It is really strong. Oh, we forgot Shadow Priest, guys. I was wondering that the god tier slot up here was looking kind of empty. I forgot what it was. It was Shadow Priest. This is probably the best spec in the game. This guy is a super sleeper. I need to get some haste gear on my Shadow Priest and try it on my stream. It's linked in the description down below. And I do 2400 challenges on almost every spec every season. I do want to do Shadow Priest. It does so much damage right now, and you're just a god. You're just immortal god. This guy was like under the radar massively, and he's still honestly under the radar by a huge margin. So yeah, Shadow is really good at the moment. Really good. Can't believe I forgot that one when we look at the ranged. Now, Holy Priest, I think it's still a solid option. I'm gonna put it on to A tier for now. Mistweaver Monk, I don't know why they're nerfing your Celestial Conduit damage. Feels really weird. You still have decent throughput. It's you can struggle in some situations, but I think once the one shots get tuned down a bit, that maybe it's not going to be as bad. So I do kind of want to leave you maybe a little bit towards the higher end. I think you're definitely more like an A tier healer. Pres Evoker I think is S tier. I think especially with the Dream Breath buffs, I think it's going to have a really high throughput. Restoration Shaman I'm putting on god tier. I think it's probably going to be the best healer now after the disc nerfs. The disc nerfs, it makes it tough for me to rank. Because I still think it's going to be really good. But Resto Druid's a bit easier to rank. I think it's probably still B, even with the 5% buff. The new tree form, I think a lot of Resto Druids are realizing you just don't take it. You just play the regular tree form because it lasts longer. You spawn more Grove Wardens. I think Resto Druid is probably the weakest healer overall, especially for Shuffle. Holy Paladin is hard. Holy Paladin is definitely hard because I don't think it's bad. I don't think it's God either. I think I'm just going to leave it on S. It's just a solid healer overall. This generally means you're a little bit above average. Discipline Priest. After the nerfs, man, like they're nerfing everything. They're nerfing your Oracle build. They're nerfing almost all your heals by like 10%. This is really hard. This Priest is really hard to determine where it's going to go. Like, I don't think it's going to fall that much. I think it's still probably going to be like somewhere in this ecosystem with the rest of the healing specs. But I do think Shaman is definitely taking some leaps above. Now, I do think like maybe some of this guy, I don't know. I've played against some Destrolocks. I think this is a fair spot from what I've seen from them. Arcane is such a niche spec that it's hard to sometimes discern exactly where its ranking should go. But I'm pretty confident about the God tier. And a lot of these specs could definitely shift like left or right or up or down by like 1 point probably as far as viability. And this guy could easily be like, I don't know, Subro could literally be anywhere on this list because they're doing such a huge thing to it that we'll basically find out on Tuesday. But it's kind of just the general direction, the weaknesses that I've seen for the specs that are towards the bottom end. But you can see that it's getting like, it is honestly getting really competitive. I'm hoping that they can make some of the healers' lives a bit easier and maybe buff up some of the guys down here a little bit more, tweak these guys up a little bit more. And then we got to see what happens with Ellie's changes as far as Stormbringer, see what happens with Subrogue. And like the season could be crazy. You may bring down these guys a tiny bit from the God tier side. And like we're only a week into the season. So it's like, I feel like we're only maybe like 1-2 weeks of tuning adjustments away from the game being in a really good spot. If we go in those directions and bringing a couple of these guys up and maybe snipping these guys down a tad bit, defense on this guy, I think maybe a little bit, buff up their sustained damage here and take down their burst damage a little bit, and maybe take their defense down a little bit between these, bring down the sustained damage a tiny bit, maybe nerf the NS healing a little bit here on Resto Shaman, and then buff up Resto Druid. Apparently his mastery is bugged, so maybe work on fixing the bug for their mastery and see how their healing output is after that has been corrected, and maybe just a little bit more throughput for Mistweaver. And I don't know about Holy Priest because again, much like I haven't seen like any Fire Mages, I haven't really seen a lot of Holy Priest. It doesn't feel like it's hugely behind, so I left it on the A tier. But those are my thoughts so far for Solo Shuffle. I think the game is likely going to be getting into a really good spot. They got rid of a lot of the cheesy one-shots. Now it's time to get into like the detailed tuning on bringing up some of these guys and bringing down some of those guys from the top. And I mean, we could have a really good season, I think, as a result of that. So I hope you guys enjoyed this discussion for Solo Shuffle PvP tier list. Thank you guys very much. If you want to make sure to stay up to date with news related to World of Warcraft, then make sure to smash the subscribe button. Your support is greatly appreciated. And I will see you in the next one.